Good morning, everyone. So clearly not a developer in charge of the start time for today's kickoff speech. We're accustomed to nobody being willing to be in a meeting before 10 a.m. So thank you for showing up. I'm excited to be here and talk with everybody about a couple things. It's 7 simple secrets, right? Just remember, simple and easy, not the same thing. All right, so without further ado, number 1, be authentic. So this is much harder than it sounds, and some of what we'll talk about here for a few minutes will really sound like a sound bite. But authenticity isn't taking on a persona of telling everybody, oh my God, that's totally super awesome, and you guys are doing a wonderful job. And it's not taking on the persona of being the hard ass who's interested in telling everybody that what they have to do is work harder, better, faster, smarter all the time. It's really about being yourself and being willing to be vulnerable, because that's what it takes to actually build trust with your teams. And that's what teams actually want to work for on a regular basis, is somebody that they can trust and rely on. So it's very key to show up every day and be your true self, even if that means being human and you've worked for people who tell you that you really should be a cyborg. Now, show up every day and be your truest self, including when you screw up. That's one of the things that a lot of people think leaders shouldn't be bothered to deal with, is admitting that they've done something wrong. Except that what you actually want to do is create an environment where everybody's willing to learn from mistakes. And if you're not willing to talk about your own first, how are they going to trust that that's something that they should be willing to do too, right? So you want to show up every day and be who you truly are and be willing to share that with your teams. Teams singular, teams plural, entire divisions of large companies, it doesn't matter. It's just key to good leadership that actually makes people want to keep working with you, right? All right, number 2, metrics matter. So you'll hear this in speeches all over this conference today, of course, because you're going to talk business track, you'll talk product track, but when it comes to leading a studio, it's the right metrics that matter the most. And so this can mean any one of a number of things, right? You might care about ARPDAU, you might care about your day 30 retention, you might care about your subscription numbers, you might have other engagement metrics with particular features that you've got rolling. You might care about employee retention, right? You might care about some of your hiring stats. Whatever it is for your team, that's fine, but know it and plaster it everywhere, right? Anything that is the metrics that your business cares about, you have to make sure that you're the one talking about it. You're the one constantly measuring it. You're the one who's willing to put it all up over the walls, Post-its or fancy posters. It doesn't really matter. You have to be willing to constantly talk to everybody about what's going on and reinforce that that's the thing you care about. So that's how you keep your team unified, right? Constant repetition of the things that matter most is what's going to get people into a position of actually paying attention to the things you want them to pay attention to, right? So just keep in mind, you can have more than one metric to follow as well. You end up with people from all over your business in here, and they're like, well, I'm not on a product team, I'm in a support role. Now you're going to have metrics that matter too. Just make sure you keep measuring them on a regular basis. Keep talking about them and celebrate them and explain them to people so that they can own and internalize it, and then they'll make better decisions for it day to day. All right, number 3, turtle up with caution. So I just moved to the UK this summer, and I realized that this is not an expression that most people are familiar with. But turtling up means to crawl into your shell or go off and hide in an office or pick a different floor than you're normally on and go sit in a conference room to get some actual work done or to get some mental processing done, right? The things we don't normally take time for. But you have to do this with caution when you're in a leadership role, because it can get misinterpreted really quickly and easily. So everyone's human. Everyone needs all of their time to actually get things done, and sometimes you want to retreat to a place of safety. When you're in a leadership role, everyone can interpret that as something entirely different. So you need to realize there's a chance that whatever budget deadline is looming, whatever massive spreadsheet problem you might be trying to solve on your own, your staff is going to think of it as something entirely different. If you do that too often, and you are not present in what's going on day to day, because what people want from real leaders is presence and participation. So make sure, even if you need to turtle up, that you give everybody on your team context for why that is and why you're having a moment where you might need to be human, right? As an introvert and somebody who's not neurotypical, I can promise you there were days where I'm like, oh, it is way too peoply out here. I need a minute. I have to go hide behind a door just for an hour. Just let people know that that's what you've got going. Because it goes back to the being authentic portion of what I talked about at the beginning as well. All right, so number 4, right in the middle of the 7 simple secrets, is don't work for sociopaths. So, first of all, this is a good reminder to have before 10 a.m. every day of your life. But really, don't work for sociopaths or with them or near them. And there are a lot of them out there, right? As somebody who just moved over from living in Silicon Valley land, they're everywhere. Now, if you're a sociopath in the room, my apologies. Perhaps this speech is not for you. But really, take to heart some of the rules and guidelines that have been given by people over the years, including, forgive the language, there's a New York Times bestseller called The No Asshole Rule, written by Robert Sutton, who's a professor at Stanford. And a couple of you are nodding. It's a wonderful book, and it gives you all of the business reasons why that toxic talent that you might be tempted to hold on to is really, really bad for your business in the long haul, because it'll cost you everybody else in your organization who actually wants to stick with you and help grow the business. In addition, it's bad for your health, and it's really not fun to work with sociopaths on a regular basis. So pay attention to culture when you're hiring, and pay attention to it even if your teams are big enough that you're not the one directing them day to day. Right? That's the sort of thing, if you work for one of the giant gaming companies, this still holds true. You need to pay attention to culture and protect everybody on your team. So that's part of your role. And sociopathy is not going to be a thing that helps you grow your business at all. So, all right, so back to something slightly more serious. Rigorous Scrum. So, fundamentally, my background is in development, right? I started out in PC games and the premium side back in the 90s, and have seen all manner of methodology and discussion come about over the years, made the big transition to Agile in the early 2000s, and let me tell you what, if your crew doesn't really understand why they might be doing something like Scrum as their development framework, they will start following it to the letter. And they will make sure that you have meetings on this time and that you must only call them by this name, and you must have, your sprints must be 2 weeks long because so-and-so said that was most important. And it's an oxymoron, because the whole point of being agile is for you to take advantage of the fact that you're in game development because you are a creative problem solver. Period. Your job as a leader is to make sure that you are coming up with customized solutions for the individuals that you manage, but also for the teams that are developing. It's your job to bring out whatever hybrid model is needed to get the job done, right? To ship the game, to launch the new content, to completely overhaul your approach from free-to-play to something that's got microtransactions, to something that's subscription-based, to something that's premium-based. Your job as leaders is to make sure that you are leading in every sense of the word. And that means really delivering a custom solution for your team, or different solutions for different teams, right? Because if you manage different genres of game, sometimes the approach to development really needs to fundamentally shift simply because of the kind of content you're creating or your release tempo. So keep that in mind, that rigorous Scrum is an oxymoron. And part of the reason to get Agile training is to really level up your mentality and evolve your assumptions about what it is you need people doing day to day and how you need them interacting regularly. Communication. So you'll hear a lot about this at every conference, right? And as you can see, these are not necessarily super secretive bullet points, but I've learned mostly the hard way over the years that whatever I think I need to do to communicate something to my team, it's not adequate. So some things to keep in mind, right? Because my general rule, partly because rule of threes is always easy to share with everybody, is multiply whatever your output needs to be by 3. You are, to quote the Hamilton musical, right? You're in the room where it happens, and your team isn't. So while you may have talked 427 times in the last 8 months about whatever topic it is you're going through, whether it's what your launch plans are around a game, or what you need to do for the game, the team's portfolio, whatever new projects you want to develop, if you're supposed to lead your team, you can't just go, okay, here's what we've decided, here's what we're going to roll out, and we're going to have this in Slack, this in email, this is what we'll print and put on the walls. Multiply that by 3, because you've already been in all the conversations. It's now your job to overcome your own brain and actually help bring your staff along on the journey. So this is fundamentally one of the biggest problems that people experience working for someone who doesn't want to give a lot of attention to internal communications, right? It's really hard for them to buy in. They don't think they're meant to be part of the solution. They're just feeling like they're going to get dictated to, or they're unclear on what's happening, right? Harkening back to metrics matter. You have to talk about it all the time. You have to be courageous about it all the time. You have to measure it all the time. You need to communicate about it all the time. And that also requires a level of specialization, right? Because you may have a portion of your team who are highly extroverted, right? Like say your whole marketing crew. And then you may have somebody who's extremely introverted but needs to be a core part of the process, like if you've got a core engine team. Make sure that you are catering to what their particular needs are with how you communicate to bring them along on the way. So that's how you're going to get their best ideas. That's also how you're going to find out if you have any pain points in whatever your plans are. And that's how you're going to end up making sure that your entire organization is unified and aligned around what you need them to get done. So when in doubt, don't trust your brain's ability to say, oh yeah, they understand what's happening. Can't tell you how many times I've heard that or even said it myself. Because as soon as you get into leadership mode, all those same things that bothered you when you were coming up in your development career, you find yourself doing them. And you're just like, ugh. Kicking yourself, realizing that you actually need to undo a lot of the stuff that you've been tackling. So take whatever you've got and adjust your brain accordingly to make sure that you're actually catering to what they need rather than what you're used to hearing inside your head. Number 7. So I have a couple people who were nodding pretty rigorously about the Scrum commentary earlier, right? So if you've done Agile methodologies and studies, you talk about servant leadership, or the way we used to talk about it before all of that stuff came through. It was just like leadership through service. This means you lead by doing, but it does not mean that you are the Counselor Troy for your Starship Enterprise. That's a really important distinction to make. Empathy is critical. That's very different than carrying somebody else's burden or treating your staff like they're children as opposed to humans. It's very different than letting everybody dump on you and then go on their merry way. That's not what your role as a leader is. And people can sometimes misinterpret your tendency to dive right in and help people learn what they need to do by doing it with them and go, oh, well, this means that they're not actually going to be able to lead or tell me what I need to tackle, or they're just here to be my sounding board. No, you're here to be a sounding board. But you've got to make sure that that's paired with the level of confidence and willingness to discuss what's going on day to day, and willing to include people in decision making so that it's a much more thoughtful process, right? It's not being a doormat, and it's not being a dictator. Neither one of those is useful. So you've got to learn how to walk the very human middle ground with empathy and teach everybody else how you want them to lead all of their teams down the line in whatever hierarchy you've got set up in your studio. So servant leadership is really where it's at. There's lots of Agile studies that you can do that help you understand what that actually means. It's nothing that most of your parents would ever be able to help you with, because that is not the universe they grew up in, for sure. But it's what everybody who works for you wants most. So think back to those professors you learned the most from when you were at uni, or all of the bosses you've had, not the terrible ones, but all the bosses you learned the most from, who were really eager to make sure that you came up and upskilled and took on more and more responsibility over time. And think about what they did tactically, day to day, that you found compelling, that made you want to keep working for them, that made you want to do better. And that's the behavior that you want to emulate. So being thoughtful, going back and figuring out what you actually wanted when you were earlier in your career, and then providing that to the teams that you've got, that's a way to really excel. And that, frankly, is a way that you can move 10,000 miles from home late in your career and still have people talk about wanting to come work for you in Cambridge. So that's been a really key part of my experience, and some things that I've learned the hard way. frankly. So that's it. Simple is not easy. But there you go. Thank you. Any questions? I'll tell war stories, but I'll keep them lighthearted if you need them. Yes, Rich.
I was just wondering, given your experience in the industry,
Yes.
which of these, I presume there's an element of universality to all these
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and stuff, but how do you think sort of, studio culture and leadership has evolved over the industry? Because over the years,
Oh, yeah.
This is an industry that's very sensitive to technology.
Yes, absolutely. So when I started out in the 90s, because I am an old, everything was very much led from the top down, right? And everybody understands now that that's not actually the best way to get the best product for your players. So at Jagex, we talk about being player obsessed because that's the level of connection and commitment we want with our player community. And that means everybody on the team has the access to interact instead of only the marketing team or only the sales team or only your community managers. Get everybody involved. So that's a fundamental shift that I've seen. And this is going to be fairly obvious, but man, in the late 90s, when I started in the industry at Maxis, and then EA bought them, and the discussions of, I'm just going to go with so-and-so's gut call because their gut's good, to, well, let's actually use some data to inform our decisions because maybe our players are behaving in a way that, random creative director who's been holed up in their ivory tower isn't going to relate to. So that's been something that I think has been an outstanding cultural shift to being much more player-centric in a way that includes everybody. So you come up with better decisions. Because when you've only got one or two people at the top of the heap making calls, that's not got the brain power of a team of 20 people or a studio of a few hundred. So I think that's been a really wonderful component of what we do. Yep. Thank you.
We still have a couple of minutes before our next session, so anyone would like to ask?
I think we've got like 2 or 3 minutes, yes. Yes, in the back.
There's a lot of a trend towards distributed teams and people working remotely.
Yes.
Do you have some tips on how to make this work?
I do, because I've worked in environments where you insist on having everybody on site, in-house, and then places where it's necessary to have people all over the world. So first of all, Slack and any other of those kinds of comms tools are very much your friend, but so is video conferencing, right? And there's all sorts of tools that you can integrate into Slack or whatever other video conference you need. That and regular on-site visits are key. So here's why, right? Our technology is always going to advance faster than our brains are going to evolve. So it's really important to be able to have a conversation with someone face-to-face, to hear their tone of voice. If somebody hears me typing out everything I've just said, they're not necessarily going to realize that Melissa is a smart aleck. They might not realize that I'm, in fact, making a joke instead of being completely serious when I talk about sociopaths in the workplace. So having regular video conferences and making sure that you get visits in where you can in person for team building exercises, and that when people come on site, even if it's a few days or a few weeks, that you spend a lot of the time with face-to-face interaction, right? So if you think about the Agile Manifesto, valuing in-person interactions is key. Because if you develop that and build that over time, remote working can become seamless and really effective, particularly for engineering roles, right? Because they don't have the context switch. They don't have the interrupt-driven workday if they're somewhere remote as opposed to an office. All of those things make a really big difference. We have had, at some of the places I've worked in the past, monitors this big when we have a remote office of 4 or 5 people, and it's a little Orwellian, but you just have the camera up all day so that people can pop up and look at questions. If you've got small teams working thousands of miles apart, it's really a big help. Sure. Anything else? Rich, you want to keep us on time? So that's the other thing you do when you're focused on leading. We good? About 10 o'clock? All right. Thanks very much, everyone.